Tonight, we're stepping into an era where the smallest slip of fabric could determine your entire future. Picture yourself in mid-19th century England, standing in your bedroom as the fire burns low and the chill creeps through the walls. The weight of what awaits you today feels almost physical, pressing down like the layers of fabric you're about to wrap around your body. Corsets, petticoats, stockings, gloves, bonnets, each one is another wall between you and the world. But before any of that matters, there's an unspoken rule hanging over you like a velvet noose that nobody ever speaks about directly, but everyone understands perfectly. No one must ever see your ankle, not your neighbor, not a passing coachman, not even the wind itself is allowed a glimpse. It sounds absolutely ridiculous by any modern standard, but in Victorian society, ankles were considered dangerously erotic. Yes, ankles, not bare shoulders, not exposed cleavage, not any of the things we might expect to cause scandal. Instead, it's the simple curve of bone just above the shoe that could provoke outrage, fuel gossip for weeks, and completely destroy a woman's moral character before she'd even finished her morning tea. Before the sun rises, you step into your stockings with careful precision. They're pale and finely woven, pulled high enough to disappear beneath bloomers and petticoats in a way that makes them practically invisible. You're careful not to tug them too tightly, because if they wrinkle or begin to sag, someone will notice. And if someone notices something like that, someone will definitely talk about it. The implications of a wrinkled stocking are somehow worse than the wrinkle itself. Outside your window, the air carries the familiar scent of soot and tea leaves mixed together. You take a deep breath and carefully guide your foot into a heeled leather boot. 20 tiny buttons run down the side of each one, so small you need a special hook just to fasten them. This isn't simply fashion or even practicality. It's armor, pure and simple. Every single layer between your skin and the world exists as protection from judgment. To Victorian eyes, a bare ankle was absolutely equivalent to public indecency in the worst possible way. You descend the stairs slowly and deliberately, knowing that one misstep, one careless flick of fabric revealing too much, means a housemaid might see it. And if a housemaid sees it, she'll whisper it to the cook, who might mention it to the butcher, and within weeks your vicar could be delivering a sermon with your name quietly folded into it like an unpleasant secret. Windy days are your mortal enemy in ways most people can't even understand. Gusts of wind are threats to your reputation in the most literal sense. You've heard stories about women who actually sewed lead coins into the hems of their skirts just to weigh them down against even the slightest breeze. Others wear ankle-length bloomers with lace decoys that simulate modesty even when their outer skirts betray them by fluttering unexpectedly. You remember a cousin's garden party from years ago, where you witnessed something that never left your mind. A girl stepped onto the gravel path, tripped slightly, and the wind caught her skirt at exactly the wrong moment. It was just a glimpse, not even skin, just white stocking. But that moment changed everything. You distinctly remember how the conversation paused as if the world itself had stopped. 3 guests turned their heads like owls, suddenly alert to danger. The girl turned absolutely red, nearly wept, and spent the rest of the afternoon pretending to feel ill. She wasn't invited back to anything after that, not to parties, not to teas, not anywhere. And here's something that strikes you as particularly cruel about these rules. While your ankles absolutely must remain hidden, your elbows somehow get a complete free pass. Evening dresses bare your shoulders and arms without anyone batting an eye, but your ankles, those stay covered at all costs. Apparently, Victorians had a very selective and strange idea about what was actually seductive and what should be protected from view. So now every time you walk anywhere, you walk slowly and with complete control. You never climb stairs if someone is standing behind you where they might see something they shouldn't. You avoid dancing with overly enthusiastic partners who might spin you too quickly. Even boarding a carriage becomes a tactical operation requiring careful planning. Gather your skirts, check the wind, ascend gracefully without flashing even a millimeter of scandal to the world watching you. It's not just about dignity or modesty in some abstract sense. It's about belonging. Plain and simple, an exposed ankle doesn't just make you improper in theory, it makes you different. And being different in Victorian England is genuinely one of the most dangerous things a woman can be. You grip your parasol a little tighter, even though it's not even sunny today. The parasol is there to complete the illusion of someone who is modest, composed, and completely covered from head to toe. You pass the baker's wife on the lane and offer a nod that's not too low and definitely not too eager. Most importantly, it's a nod where your posture stays perfectly controlled so that your hem doesn't lift even slightly. As you make your way toward the dressmaker's shop, you catch sight of a girl, probably no more than 16 years old, rushing across a muddy lane with her skirts actually hitched up to avoid the puddles. For just 1 second, her ankle is completely visible, stocking and skin and everything, and she's laughing. You freeze for just a moment, not from horror exactly, but from something closer to confusion. How is she not absolutely terrified? The older woman beside you, your aunt perhaps, or your official chaperone for the morning, clicks her tongue in clear disapproval. Girls these days, she mutters, barely loud enough to hear, but carrying enough judgment to wither an entire oak tree. You know what's expected of you because you've been raised on stories, not fairy tales, but cautionary ones about what happens when girls forget the rules. You know about a distant cousin whose bare ankle led to whispered invitations, which led to scandal, which led to being shipped off to a rest home where no letters came back from. You know about a neighbor girl whose engagement was completely broken off because someone saw her lift her skirts too quickly while stepping over a puddle. The groom's mother called it a sign of looseness, and that was that. This is the world you're living in right now, a world where ankles determine marriage prospects and lace trim can rewrite your entire social ranking. But there's something darker beneath all of this surface concern about propriety. You've heard the rumors whispered by housemaids after dark. Rumors you're absolutely not supposed to know about. That some men, respectable married men with standing in the community, actually request private glimpses of a woman's ankle. That they pay for it. That some actresses and dancers are admired not for their talent at all, but for how daringly short their performance costumes happen to be. It's all part of the same machine spinning around you. Public shame paired with private obsession. Your ankle must be invisible during daylight hours, yet men will fantasize about it behind velvet curtains at night. You're genuinely not supposed to know that, but of course you do because you have eyes and ears and a mind that works. So you tighten the ribbon at your wrist and lower your hem half an inch before entering the shop. You take each step as if you're performing because in every sense you are. Every moment is a test. Are you modest enough? Are you graceful enough? Are you silent enough? But most of all, are you covered enough? Inside the shop, a new fabric catches your eye, striped pale blue and ivory. For just a moment, you imagine how lovely it would look as a summer dress, but then the worry creeps in. Will the hem fall low enough? What if you had to climb a garden step? What if the carriage hits a rut in the road? Could someone possibly see something they shouldn't? You abandon the idea completely and choose heavier wool instead. It's less flattering, definitely not as beautiful, but it won't betray you. You can trust it not to ripple in the wind or lift when you sit down. You can trust it to keep your secret safe, to protect your ankles from the hungry eyes and sharpened tongues of Victorian society. By the end of the day, your legs absolutely ache, your boots pinch painfully, your posture has been rigid for hours, and your entire body feels like it's been held in place by invisible strings. But your ankles, those remained hidden. And in this world, that means you did everything exactly right. You sit on the edge of velvet chairs, holding a porcelain plate in one gloved hand and a silver fork in the other. Afternoon tea is in full swing with tiny sandwiches, miniature cakes, and fruit arranged like still life art. There's polite chatter, the occasional cough into a handkerchief, and the ever-present sound of china clinking against china in that delicate way that sounds like a carefully choreographed dance. Across the table, a woman reaches delicately for a slice of pear, and you follow suit. But then your hand stops, because on the same platter sits a perfectly ripe banana, and you absolutely cannot be the one to take it. You glance around subtly, trying to determine if anyone has touched it. Is it simply decoration? But no, the host, in a burst of enthusiasm, insists that everyone should absolutely try the fruit, because bananas are imported this week from the West Indies. You blink, because while the banana is indeed new to England, widely available thanks to steamship trade, its shape, texture, and the manner in which you must consume it have already earned it a terrible reputation among Victorian women. You glance at your chaperone, and she raises a single eyebrow. That's more than enough. You retreat quickly to the safety of a tea biscuit because eating a banana requires a kind of intimacy that is completely unacceptable in public. You have to peel it, hold it, take bites, chew, all while maintaining eye contact with other guests. Not a chance. Not when the banana has somehow become a symbol of indecency in Victorian minds. Though this is never spoken about directly, it's unspoken, but every woman in the room understands perfectly. It's not written in any official etiquette guide anywhere, but every single woman knows that bananas, peaches, and other fleshy dripping fruits are best avoided in polite company. Some say the Queen herself once refused to allow peaches to be served with their skins still on. Too messy, she claimed, too suggestive. Others whisper that an actress was once booed off a stage simply for biting into a peach during a scene. A peach, but the banana, it occupies its own special category of scandal. And it's not even about the actual act of eating it. It's what the act suggests to watching minds. The shape of it, the softness, the slow, deliberate peeling required. It doesn't matter if you're the most modest woman in the entire room. A single banana can undo years of careful reputation management built up through proper behavior. Even fruit salads become complete minefields for decision-making. Some hostesses slice everything into neat cubes just to avoid any unfortunate interpretations by their guests. Others soak the fruit in wine, claiming it's for preservation purposes. But everyone knows it's really so no one will be tempted to lick the juice from their fingers in ways that might be misconstrued. You sigh gently and reach instead for a dry cracker, because that's always safe. Still, part of you wonders what it would feel like, just once, to be alone and peel a banana slowly, boldly, even laugh while doing so. But this world isn't built for those kinds of thoughts. You sip your tea and push them away. The woman beside you makes what is clearly a fatal error. She picks up a banana with a gloved hand, peels it halfway, and takes the tiniest bite imaginable. She doesn't even chew, just presses it between her teeth and swallows. The room goes quiet just slightly, and it's enough to change everything. Someone coughs deliberately. A servant shifts in the hallway. Your chaperone stiffens noticeably. Though no one says a single word, you know she will not be invited to the next tea party, not anywhere really. Later that evening, you're in the drawing room with your mother and two of her bridge companions listening to them trade thinly veiled insults behind lace fans. The topic inevitably circles back to that woman from tea. "Did you see how she held it?" one asks, with obvious disdain, not even with a fork. No sense of boundaries whatsoever. Another murmurs, dabbing her lips with a handkerchief, though she hasn't taken a sip of anything in minutes. Shocking, or shame. You nod along with them, not because you genuinely agree, but because you're expected to participate in the judgment. It's the price of silence and safety in this world. You've learned that in this society, even the texture of fruit can determine your moral worth. Bananas aren't simply food. They're symbols, markers, tests. And failing that test even once means risking exile from polite society forever. Don't think it's just bananas either. Peaches, mangoes, even figs all carry their own whispered associations and unspoken warnings. Some say a well-bred woman should only eat fruit that can be cut into neat cubes and lifted with a fork. Never anything requiring licking, peeling, or biting with visible effort. The rules aren't written down anywhere, but they're memorized through careful social observation, like learning the steps of a dangerous dance. One girl named Margaret from Kensington was once seen biting into a nectarine on a garden bench. The juice ran down her wrist. She licked it instinctively without thinking about it. 1 week later, she was engaged to a widower twice her age and quietly removed from every lunch and guest list you'd ever seen her on. Coincidence, perhaps? Or perhaps someone's mother noticed and decided to intervene. Because it's not just about you as an individual. It's about your family, your sisters, your eligibility in the marriage market. Your entire household's respectability can be stained by a single bite that's deemed too bold. Your younger cousin once asked innocently what was actually wrong with bananas. She was 8 years old. Your aunt looked absolutely stricken and told her they're strictly for breakfast, only and only at home. That was the end of that conversation. The irony that no one talks about is that men are completely exempt from these rules. Your brother can eat 3 bananas in a single sitting and get praised for his appetite. He can slurp oysters straight from the shell, lick plum juice off his fingers, even belch after supper, and still be considered a fine, genuinely marriageable gentleman. A bit rough, perhaps, but charming, in a masculine way. You, on the other hand, must manage your mouth like a stage curtain. Anything that passes through it becomes a moral statement. Each bite is choreography. Every chew is a performance in restraint. So you practice in your room late at night. You practice cutting a banana into slices before you eat it. You practice eating peaches with a spoon, carefully scraping the flesh from the pit so you don't have to suck at it. You practice tucking a napkin under your wrist before lifting fruit to your lips. All of this rehearsal is for one single purpose: to create the illusion of effortlessness, to look like a lady who never struggles, never hungers, never drips juice down her chin. Eventually, you stop choosing fruit at social functions altogether because it's too risky, too symbolic of everything you're supposed to suppress. You learn to survive on dry cakes and conversation instead. And yet, in the privacy of your kitchen, long after the guests have gone and your maid has been dismissed for the night, you take a banana from the pantry, you peel it slowly and luxuriously, not looking over your shoulder, not flinching at all. You bite into it and you laugh just once, just enough. And in that single moment, your mouth is entirely your own. You're standing in the garden wearing your second-best walking dress, still heavy with layers, but at least it doesn't trail in the mud like the blue satin one does. The sun is warm, the hedges are trimmed perfectly, and the scent of lavender waves from the corner beds. A bird hops past you. You bend down ever so slightly to pick up a fallen glove, and your knees instinctively start to lower into a crouch. Stop. You freeze completely. You can't do this. You absolutely mustn't do this. You immediately correct your posture, straightening your back, pressing your legs neatly together, the motion stiff as a board. One quick glance around confirms it. No one saw you almost squat. You exhale with relief. Crisis completely averted. Because in the Victorian world you inhabit, how you position your body is a moral declaration about your character. Squatting, crouching, or anything that spreads your legs even slightly is not just unladylike. It's actually indecent in the worst possible way. There's a reason that Victorian etiquette guides devote entire chapters to how a lady should sit in various situations. A woman must always keep her knees together, ankles crossed if possible, back perfectly straight. And whatever you do, never touch the ground with both feet flat if your bottom is lowered. That's considered common. That's what the washerwoman does behind the yard gate. That's what children do when playing with sticks in the mud. That's what the household help does. But you're not help. You're a lady. Or at least, you're desperately trying to be perceived as one. And that means your body must stay vertical, narrow, and completely contained. No lounging, no flopping, and absolutely no squatting under any circumstances. Even in private, even when no one is watching, the rule lingers in your muscles and bones. You've seen girls chastised by their governesses for kneeling too low while retrieving a fallen book. One poor cousin tried to tie her shoe in the parlor, crouched like a cat would, and was told to compose her limbs or risk being labeled as vulgar. The phrase haunts you because it suggests your arms and legs are rebellious musicians threatening to break into jazz at any moment. In your family, there's a little bench by the entryway. It's not actually for sitting on. No, it's for resting one hand as you bend correctly to adjust your hem or fix your shoe, always with dignity, always with one leg extended backward as if you're about to curtsy to the Queen herself. Sometimes it takes longer to tie a bootlace than it takes to walk a full block, but speed is not the point here. Elegance is. Elegance is containment. Elegance is stillness. You watch a boy, probably 12 years old, chase a hoop down the cobbled street. He squats easily to pick it up, then springs in one motion, laughing, and you feel something very strange stir in your chest. Not longing exactly, not quite, but a quiet kind of grief for a body that moves without fear or second-guessing. Your body, by contrast, has become a set of rules wrapped in fabric, and posture is everything in this world. A slouch hints at laziness. Legs apart hints at looseness. Resting your elbow on a table is only acceptable in the privacy of your own room, and only if you're writing poetry about melancholy. You remember a story once told at a sewing circle that still makes your stomach drop. A young woman bent down to feed a stray cat behind her house. A neighbor saw her squatting, skirt lifted slightly at the knees, and actually wrote an anonymous letter to her father. She was promptly forbidden from walking alone ever again. The cat, presumably, went hungry. The fear of your own knees becomes instinctive over time. You begin to move like clockwork, deliberate, upright, choreographed in every way. Even when you're completely alone, your muscles remember the rules burned into them. You perch on chairs instead of sinking into them naturally. You kneel on one side only, never both knees at once. You pick things up by bending at the waist like an awkward mechanical crane rather than letting your body lower naturally. It's not about comfort at all. It's about control. Control of your body. Control of how you're perceived. Control of your reputation. And there are layers beneath these external layers. Both fabric and expectation run deep. Your dress restricts you physically, yes, but it's the corset that truly turns your spine into a rod and your rib cage into a cage. With your abdomen cinched so tightly and your breath kept shallow, it's almost physically painful to squat or fold your body. To do so might mean tearing a seam, or worse, actually, snapping a bone. One woman in Bath allegedly broke 2 ribs after sitting without proper poise on a low stone bench. Another fell ill after crouching to avoid the rain and exposing her under layers to damp air. Whether these tales are completely true or not hardly matters anymore. They're retold like scripture in drawing rooms and sewing circles. Warnings to keep your limbs disciplined and your instincts deeply buried. Even the furniture in genteel households conspires against your comfort. The seats are made shallow on purpose, with no room to actually lounge or sink into. Armchairs are deliberately narrow. Backrests are stiff and unyielding. Rocking chairs are associated with grandmothers and servants. Sofas are for sitting upright and sipping tea, not napping, sprawling, or, heaven forbid, tucking your feet underneath you like a normal person. But it's not just posture, it's positioning. If you're seated and your legs accidentally spread just slightly, you feel the heat rise in your chest immediately. You know someone will notice. A matron, a governess, a stranger with a sharp eye. And even if they don't say anything directly, they will remember. Your reputation is made not in grand speeches, but in these fleeting moments. So you fold yourself up day after day into the narrowest version of yourself possible. Your spine aches. Your legs throb with tension, but you endure because sprawling is reserved for men in clubs. Slouching is for drunkards in the street. Squatting is for animals. Yet still in the garden, there are moments, brief and unguarded, where instinct overtakes decorum, like when your dog drops his ball at your feet, or when a daisy blooms just outside the neat path, too small and too lovely to ignore. Sometimes you do it. You squat. Not fully, not openly, but just enough to reach something on the ground, to feel your heels touch earth, to remember what freedom feels like. You don't stay there long, but the sensation lingers all day. Later that night in your room, you'll try it again, not out of rebellion exactly, but curiosity. You'll close the door, turn the key, and lower yourself slowly, watching your knees bend, your skirt fan out around you, your body assume a posture not permitted in any parlor. You'll feel strange, exposed, powerful, and just before you rise again, you'll smile because, for one short moment, you occupied space the way your body was meant to. It's a dinner party at your cousin's house. White linen tablecloth, silver candlesticks, polished forks lined up like soldiers at attention. You sit at the long table between your aunt and a man you were hastily introduced to as Mr. Levington of Nottingham. His sideburns gleam with pomade, and his waistcoat is too tight for actual comfort. But that's not your concern tonight. Your real concern is the chicken. More specifically, what you're allowed to call its lower portion. Because, as absurd as it sounds, you cannot say the word leg. Not in this house. Not in front of men, not in front of anyone, really. The word leg is too suggestive, too anatomical, too improper for polite conversation. You glance at the platter as the servant carves the bird and wonder whether you can get away with just pointing at what you want. You remember the rule drilled into you by your finishing governess. A lady does not refer directly to limbs, undergarments, or anything that makes the listener imagine her actual body beneath the dress. That includes legs, pantaloons, corsets, bust, thighs, and yes, even the word trousers. Your safest option tonight is to ask for a bit of the dark meat because that's the coded phrase everyone uses. If you slip and say leg, it might cause no visible uproar, but you'll feel the tension ripple through the room like a stone thrown into still water. A furrowed brow, a sideways glance, a teacup paused midair. It happened once to a girl you knew named Agatha, bright, eager, just a bit too sincere, in a way that would doom her. She was invited to Sunday roast with a judge's family. When offered the choice of cuts, she said brightly, "Oh, I do prefer a leg." And that was it. The wife stiffened immediately. The son choked on his cider. Agatha was never invited anywhere again. You were too young to understand why then. Now you know perfectly well. The word painted a picture of her actual legs, possibly bare, possibly parted. And once that image enters a gentleman's mind, it cannot be erased or unseen. Which is why, even now, as you sip your soup carefully, your vocabulary is as tightly laced as your corset. You do not speak of legs. You do not acknowledge their existence, even in yourself. If you trip, you've simply lost your balance. If your stockings tear, they are damaged below. If your petticoat rides up, you adjust your skirts. This code extends beyond speech alone. It bleeds into how you walk, how you sit, how you even think about your own body. Legs become abstractions, ghosts. You have them, of course, but you're never supposed to acknowledge them out loud. Mr. Levington beside you says something about his hunting trip. He caught a buck by the hind leg, he says casually. You flinch, not because of the imagery he's describing, but because he said the word aloud, boldly, without any shame. Men can do that. They can say leg, thigh, pants, even drawers, and it's considered rugged, earthy, masculine. You ask for the lower portion or simply say whatever you recommend. That's the game, and you've learned to play it well, but it wears on you. This constant substitution of language, this endless dance of euphemisms. It's like walking through life perpetually on tiptoe. Your own vocabulary is a minefield of meaning. One wrong word, and you're not a lady anymore. You're an invitation. After dinner, you retreat to the parlor with the other women while the men linger behind, already lighting cigars and launching into unchecked political opinions. The ladies gather around the tea tray. Conversation turns to lace prices, then to someone's daughter's upcoming debut, and finally, as if pulled by magnetic force, to the evening's near miss. Did you hear her? Of course they all did. She almost said it. One whispers, lips barely moving, she reached for the chicken and then caught herself. Smart girl, says another. Quick tongue, or rather quick to bite it. The group chuckles, is dainty and restrained. You join in, though your smile feels rehearsed because you almost said it too. You had felt the word forming behind your teeth. Leg. You'd even tasted the L sound, but you swallowed it down just in time and offered instead the part just above the wing. Safe, obscure, absolutely acceptable. This is what dinner parties are now. Not just socializing, but survival. A game of phrasing, a performance of deliberate vagueness. Even as you sit with other women, even in spaces without men present, the rules still hold completely. You think of your maid Anna. Earlier that week, she stubbed her toe and cried out, blasted leg, before covering her mouth immediately. You had to scold her gently, though part of you admired her freedom. She doesn't dine with judges. She doesn't attend charity luncheons. She can call her body what it actually is. You, on the other hand, are surrounded entirely by women who refer to their legs as lower limbs and their underwear as unmentionables. Even the word corset is sometimes replaced with foundation garment, as if the object wrapped around your ribs, squeezing the very air from your lungs, is too intimate to name aloud. One widow in town once referred to her aching hip at a sewing circle, and the hostess changed the subject so swiftly you'd think the woman had sworn. And yet the absurdity hides something far deeper, a genuine fear of the body itself. The Victorian ideal isn't about modesty, it's about denial. Denial of pain, hunger, desire, even basic anatomy. Your very vocabulary is shaped to erase you, but not entirely. At night in your room, with the curtains drawn and the lamp burning low, you take off your shoes, your stockings, your skirts. You sit quietly on the floor. You stretch your legs out in front of you and simply look at them. Not lower limbs, not the area below. Legs, you flex your feet. You feel the ache in your calves from standing all day. You run your hands down the muscles and whisper the word just once, just for yourself. Leg. It's such a simple thing. A word used thousands of times a day by everyone else. Men, boys, maids, even animals have legs. But for you, it's something reclaimed. A quiet protest. You lie back on your rug, legs sprawled, untucked, unhidden, and let the silence hold you. Not proper, not poetic, just real. And somehow, that feels far more dignified than anything else you've done today. It starts with a glance. A man passes you on the street, a stranger in a tall hat, with eyes as sharp as his collar starch. Your gaze lifts by complete accident. Just for a moment, you meet his eyes directly. And just like that, you've made a statement. Not a hello, not a smile, not a word. Just eye contact. But in the world you live in, that is more than enough. Because in Victorian society, a woman's gaze is not neutral. It's charged with meaning. Every single flicker of eye contact is either a challenge, a flirtation, or a mistake. And the rules about what that means are absolutely clear. Respectable women look down. You lower your eyes immediately, cheeks flushing with a kind of shame usually reserved for actual sins. But it's too late. He saw it. You know he did. And what he chooses to make of that glance, that's completely out of your hands now. This is the lesson drilled into you since girlhood. Modesty begins with the eyes. Do not stare. Do not linger. Do not invite. Look past men, not at them. A demure woman keeps her gaze soft, sideways, or safely lowered. Even if a man speaks directly to you, your eyes should flutter like wings, dipping politely, never locking in for too long. Long eye contact is what actresses do, or worse, actresses who aren't even on stage. You remember what happened at Mrs. Dunworthy's musical last spring? One of the guests was a merchant's daughter with bold eyebrows and a tendency to speak before thinking. She laughed at something a young man said and held his gaze a second too long, just a second. But it rippled through the room like spilled perfume. By the end of the night, someone whispered that she was forward. By the next week, the word was loose. By the next month, she wasn't invited anywhere at all, because a glance, just one, can be read like an entire page of scandal. And that's what makes it so maddening. Men may leer, they may wink, they may scan you like catalog items without suffering any consequence, but you must master the art of invisibility without blindness. You must see everything while pretending to see nothing. It's not easy to do consistently. At church, you sit 2 pews behind a man who adjusts his collar every 5 minutes. You notice, of course you do, but you do not look directly at him, not even when he turns to glance at you. Your gaze remains on the book, the floor, the window, anywhere else. It becomes a skill, just like needlework or dancing. You learn to recognize someone's approach by the rhythm of their footsteps. You know a man's mood by the tilt of his hat. You hear the inflection of their interest in how they say your name, but you do not meet their eyes because your eyes are not your own. They are interpreted, filtered through the rules of the room, the assumptions of others, and the heavy fog of Victorian propriety. And worst of all, if something happens, if a man misreads your gaze, acts on it, or tells a story about what he thinks he saw, the blame lands squarely on your shoulders. Because why were you looking at him like that? At home, even your mirror reminds you to behave. Your mother once told you that a lady should practice her expressions alone, not to become vain, heaven forbid, but to ensure her face betrays nothing whatsoever. A raised eyebrow can imply sass. A parted mouth suggests longing. And the eyes, they're the most dangerous of all. So you rehearse them in silence. The soft glance, the modest blink, the lowered lids, the kind that say, I see you, but only as far as politeness allows. Never bold, never open. And if you're lucky, no one will ever accuse your eyes of saying something your mouth did not actually say. Still, your eyes betray you all the time. When a man speaks complete nonsense in the drawing room, you want to roll them. You don't. When a cousin makes a cruel joke and expects your laughter, you want to narrow them. You don't. When the minister's son stares at you too long at the harvest ball, you want to glare. Instead, you blink once and look away. This constant self-editing becomes exhausting and relentless. You carry it with you to every meal, every gathering, every walk along the garden path because being seen seeing is just as dangerous as being seen touched. You heard the stories. One girl in Derbyshire supposedly smiled at a man on a train platform and met his eyes for a moment too long. He followed her home for weeks afterward, insisting it was a sign of affection. Her family had to relocate just to escape him, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she had looked. And then there are the letters, awkward, unwanted letters from strangers. "I saw you at the haberdashery," one man once wrote to your cousin, "and your eyes said more than your lips could ever dare." She had never spoken to him, never seen him again. But he believed her eyes had promised something they hadn't. But in this world, a man's interpretation becomes your reputation. And that reputation, fragile as spun sugar, is yours alone to protect. With every blink, you grow into the habit. By the time you're 20, you've mastered the 1,000th-yard stare. Your eyes always rest a fraction below actual eye level, somewhere near the collarbone, just enough to be present, but never enough to be read as an invitation. You even begin to admire the women who play the game well, those who flutter their lashes with military precision, those who can smile with their mouth while their eyes stay completely neutral, those who never ever look a man full in the face unless they genuinely intend to ruin him. Because that's the strange power it all carries. When you do meet a man's eyes deliberately and unflinchingly, it becomes a weapon, a signal, a dare so potent that just once in your life you want to try it. And maybe one day, perhaps on a carriage ride with a window down or in the hallway when no one else is around, you will. Maybe with a stranger you'll never see again, just to test what your eyes can actually say when unchained. But not today. Today, your glance stays modest, safe, vanilla, because a proper lady's eyes are not her own. They belong to everyone else. You're sitting at the dinner table again, this time at your uncle's estate where the cutlery is heavier, the wine darker, and the rules somehow even stricter. The table is long enough that you can barely make out what the guests at the far end are saying. Not that it matters. You're not expected to speak. You're expected to listen and to smile. Maybe laugh quietly at the right moments. But to speak? Not unless you're asked a direct question. And even then, your answer should be short, sweet, and entirely harmless. This isn't your first supper under such conditions. You've learned the flow by heart. The men speak first, loudly, comfortably, often with their mouths full. They discuss Parliament, factory strikes, investments in India, whether Darwin ought to be banned from polite conversation. They quote Latin. They misquote Shakespeare. They throw out opinions like apple cores, never worried where they'll land. You talk about the weather, the rose garden, perhaps the freshness of the scone, but only if someone else mentions them first. Because, as a lady, you're not here to dominate the conversation. You're here to decorate it. Your voice should add color. Never wait. And never under any circumstance should you speak over a man. The worst thing you can be accused of is being too talkative. Worse still, opinionated. Your cousin was once both. At a dinner, not unlike this one, she offered a counterpoint to a gentleman's views on Irish self-governance. Her argument was intelligent, measured, even polite. But you remember the moment after, the silence, the way the men blinked, the way her own father cleared his throat and reached for his drink. Afterwards, her mother whispered to yours, "She really must learn not to speak so firmly." And so you learn that when someone says something wrong, you nod vaguely. When someone says something shocking, you offer a neutral murmur. When someone says something clever, you laugh softly, even if you don't understand it. You become a master of filler phrases. How interesting. Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. Indeed, you learn to speak without speaking and to keep your true thoughts filed away in the same drawer where you keep your unsent letters and overdue dreams. You're not stupid, not by any measure. You read novels with complex heroines. You know which countries are at war and why. You secretly understand the basics of bookkeeping from helping your brother. But none of that belongs at this table. You're considered too clever for your own good, and clever girls don't get invitations or husbands. You reach for your glass and take a sip, not too large, because a lady never drains her cup. You dab at your lips, not because they need wiping, but because it buys you time to think about what you might say if you were allowed to actually speak your mind. Something in you wants to say something. Add a point. Make a genuine joke. Show that you're real, but you don't. You let the conversation pass over you like mist, invisible, weightless, because a proper woman's words must be like perfume, faint, pleasant, never overpowering. As the courses change from fish to fowl to puddings layered with cream, you notice how effortlessly the men fill the air. Their words form bridges across the table, while yours are expected to stay folded in your lap like your napkin. At one point, a gentleman speaks with great passion about steamships and their potential to conquer the East. He refers to the colonies as if they were exotic beasts waiting to be tamed. You know, because you've read extensively, that the subject is far more complicated. You know names, dates, trade routes. You could ask a sharp question that would make him pause. You could add a single fact that would make him reconsider. But your aunt once told you, darling, it's not that your ideas aren't interesting. It's that men don't come here for debate. They come to be admired. So you admire, or at least you pretend to. You offer your best nod. You murmur fascinating, even as your hands clench beneath the tablecloth with frustration. And that's the thing, isn't it? This isn't silence. It's camouflage. But not everyone plays the part well. There was a girl 2 seasons ago named Clara, daughter of a solicitor, at a formal luncheon. She laughed at a gentleman's incorrect quotation of Aristotle and corrected him gently, kindly. She even apologized afterward, but it didn't matter. Word spread like wildfire. People said she was embarrassing, untrained, ambitious, which in your world is one notch above immoral. She's not invited anymore. Her dance card emptied in less than a month. So you tuck that memory of Clara into your mind like a pressed flower, bright but fading, a warning. Later that night, in the drawing room, the men are still talking. Their voices carry from behind the smoking door, filled with brandy and unchecked opinions. You and the other women sit in a delicate ring near the piano. Someone begins to play softly. Someone else embroiders quietly, stitching roses into the edge of a handkerchief. You glance around and realize something genuinely chilling. No one is saying anything real, not really. There's conversation, yes, but it's carefully looped and trimmed like lace. No sharp edges, no tension, no heat. Just soft things. The weather, the neighbor's new puppy, a dress spotted in a shop window, nothing that would upset the delicate arrangement of the evening. You wonder what would happen if you stood up and said something real. I disagree with what he said about Ireland. Or I read something today that moved me deeply. Or even I have a genuine question. But of course you don't, because to do so would not just be bold. It would be disruptive. It would disturb the fabric everyone's been trying to weave so tightly. And yet later in your room, your voice returns. You speak freely, even if only to yourself. You argue with no one. You laugh without lowering your volume. You imagine what it might feel like to say things exactly as they are, not as they ought to be. And you whisper just loud enough for the silence to hear. I do have something to say. No one interrupts. No one corrects you. And for a moment, your voice belongs wholly to yourself. You're standing in the parlor, gloved and perfectly still, waiting for introductions to finish. A distant cousin has just arrived from Kent, newly returned from the continent, well-traveled, and by all accounts, a man of considerable importance. The room turns toward you, names are exchanged. He smiles politely, and now comes the moment of truth, the handshake. But you don't move, you don't extend your hand, you wait. Because in this delicate Victorian ballet, you must never, ever be the first to offer your hand. Even if you met the man before, even if you're genuinely excited to see him, even if your palms are sweating inside your kid leather gloves and your instincts are screaming for connection, you wait. If he offers his hand, you may respond. If he does not, you smile and nod and pretend it doesn't sting. You were taught this rule as early as your multiplication tables. A proper lady never initiates physical contact, not even the most innocent kind. The risk is supposedly too great. A handshake can be read as familiarity or worse, forwardness. And forwardness is the slope that leads inevitably to ruin. Your brother, meanwhile, can shake hands with anyone, men, women, butchers, beggars, barristers. His grip is expected to be firm, assertive, a sign of strength and character. Yours must be soft, decorative, a response, not a beginning. You remember the story of a young woman who once offered her hand first to a visiting clergyman. Not aggressively, just a polite gesture. But he recoiled slightly, surprised, and said something about how modern things are becoming. Later, he told someone that she had seemed eager. The word clung to her like smoke for months afterward. So now when you introduce yourself to a man, be he bishop or banker or complete stranger, you keep your hand close to your skirts. If he nods, you curtsy. If he extends his hand, you gently raise yours and let it rest like a feather in his palm. Never squeeze, never linger. The glove in this moment does more than conceal your skin. It acts as a barrier, a message. I'm not available, not exposed, not claiming territory. And yet this one small gesture contains entire worlds. There are women who know how to manipulate it, who offer just a finger and look away to appear aloof. Others who press slightly too long to hint at interest. It's all performance, rehearsed in silence, refined in boarding schools and parlors, judged instantly and without mercy. And if you misstep, if your fingers are too cold or too warm, too bare or too bold, you're not a lady. You're something else entirely. After the handshake moment passes, you feel it in your bones. Relief, like a curtain, has dropped. You didn't break the rule. You didn't embarrass your aunt or your mother or the generations of quiet women who came before you. Still, it lingers in your thoughts. How strange it is that something so small, the offering of a hand, can carry such enormous weight. You retreat to the side of the room, pretending to study a vase of roses while the gentlemen talk about train schedules and tariffs. Your hand, still tucked neatly against your waist, pulses with withheld energy. Sometimes you imagine what it would feel like to be the one to reach first, to walk into a room with your arm extended, confident and sure, to clasp a hand like it actually means something, not just politeness, but genuine mutual presence. But Victorian women do not reach. They wait. You remember a particular afternoon, tea at the home of Lady Winthrop, whose house rules were stricter than any chapel. A young woman visiting from America had arrived, and in greeting the host's eldest son, she extended her hand firmly, confidently. You still recall the way the boy's eyes widened, not unpleasantly, but with absolute shock so profound he dropped his monocle into his cup. The room went utterly silent. Later, someone said the girl had probably been raised in commerce. Others muttered about New World manners. She was never invited back. You wonder sometimes where she is now. Perhaps happily married to someone who finds directness appealing, or perhaps still shocking drawing rooms somewhere else, reaching boldly into unshaken spaces. Back in the present, the conversation shifts. A gentleman turns toward you. He nods politely. You nod in return. That is the entire exchange. You'll be praised later for being appropriately reserved. It's not that you dislike handshakes, it's that handshakes belong to men. A handshake implies equality, even the smallest sliver of it. It is, after all, a greeting of equals, a shared grip, a brief union of presence. And you're not equal, not here, not yet. Instead, your hands are for receiving gifts, letters, rings. They are meant to be admired, not engaged. Softened with rose oil, covered in gloves, resting on embroidered laps, they are meant to be still. But you think sometimes of all the power your hand could hold if allowed. Not in the aggressive crush of a man's shake, but in a quiet offering that means, I am here. I see you. I choose this. Maybe one day in some future world, women will walk into rooms and extend their hands first. Not out of boldness, but out of the certainty that they're allowed to. Until then, your handshake lives in your pocket, hidden, waiting. You're seated at your writing desk. Late afternoon sun is slanting through lace curtains. A half-written letter lies before you. The paper is cream-colored and crisp with edges uncreased. There's a faint scent of lavender pressed into the fibers. Your pen hovers above the page, and you hesitate, not over the words because those have been rehearsed in your mind all morning. You're hesitating over the ink itself. You reach for the familiar black bottle. Safe, conservative, expected. But sitting beside it, almost glowing in the light, is something completely different. Violet ink. A tiny bottle gifted by your cousin who visited Paris and came back full of strange ideas. You want to use it desperately. You imagine how the loops of your handwriting would bloom in that lovely purple hue, how it would make your letter stand out as charming, expressive, modern. But you don't, because in Victorian society, a lady's correspondence is judged not only by her grammar and penmanship, but by her aesthetic restraint. And violet ink is too romantic, too frivolous, too loud for acceptable society. The acceptable colors are very few. Black for business and decorum, brown sometimes for personal notes among family. Blue is already a stretch. Red is strictly for corrections if used at all. Anything scented, glittered, or colored in any bold way, well, that's a different story entirely. A letter written in violet ink might be charming in a French salon, but here in English drawing rooms, it borders on scandal. Not because of what you actually say, but because of how you say it. You recall the story of Miss Jane Tilling from Exeter. She wrote her fiancé weekly letters while he was stationed in Kolkata, but one arrived written in green ink with a bold, swirling script on thick lilac paper. His mother opened it first. The engagement was broken off within a month. No one ever officially said why. They didn't need to. The stationery spoke louder than the words inside. Your own mother once burned a note sent by a woman who used pink-tinted parchment and a violet seal. "Smells like desperation," she said, tossing it into the fire with a flick of lace and disdain. "So you dip your pen into the black. The ink clings to the nib like obedience itself. You write carefully, slowly. The tone must be light, but not silly, affectionate, but not forward. You avoid exclamation marks. You consider and then discard the word dear because it's too familiar. You settle instead on my kind regards and underline nothing. Your handwriting, once expressive and lupin in your private journals, is now clipped and legible. It must not suggest a mind too whimsical. It must appear calm, predictable, feminine, in the most constraining sense. Because in Victorian etiquette, a letter is more than just a message. It's a reflection of your entire soul, and your soul, if it hopes to marry well or be taken seriously, must be neatly folded in black ink, sealed in wax, with absolutely no trace of violet passion or ungoverned flair. When the letter is finally finished, you blot it gently. No smudges, no fingerprints. You fold it precisely into thirds, avoiding any crease that might misalign your closing salutation. You select a matching cream envelope. No embossing, no flourishes, just your initials and small gold lettering barely noticeable. Now comes the seal. Your seal is plain, a small circle with a forget-me-not motif. Blue wax is permissible if subtle. Red wax is risky, unless it's for condolences or business. Pink is reserved for women of looser reputations. You've heard whispers that a pink wax letter once caused a woman's invitation to the Queen's garden party to be revoked. No one could prove it was the letter, but no one doubted it either. You press the seal into the wax and wait. You hold the envelope like it's a fragile thing, because it is. This simple piece of paper can carry affection, ruin, misunderstanding, or marriage proposals. And every single detail, ink, seal, spacing, spelling, is absolutely ripe for judgment. Later, at the postbox, you notice other letters dropped in. One has a pale yellow ribbon wrapped around it. Another smells faintly of rose oil. You don't need to see the names to know what people will say about the senders. She's rather bold. She reads French novels, I hear. Doesn't she have any male relatives to properly guide her? Because Victorian letter writing is not just a domestic task. It is a complete performance of femininity, carefully composed and tightly edited. It's the one space where you're technically allowed to speak, but only if you follow every single rule. One girl in your circle named Elizabeth, with a quick smile and ink-stained fingers, sometimes writes in green. She says it reminds her of moss and spring and ideas. She once wrote to a publisher submitting a poem using green ink on blue paper. The publisher returned it unread with a note attached. "We do not review eccentric submissions." She cried not because of the rejection, though that stung, but because the color had mattered more than the actual words inside. And this is the lesson that etches itself into your hand with every letter you write. You may feel deeply, you may dream wildly, you may ache to express something genuinely real, but your words must be clothed properly, modestly, predictably, in black. You tuck the sealed envelope into your basket and carry it to the corner for posting. As you walk, you think about the letter itself, how careful it is, how restrained, how much it does not actually say, how it omits your small, beautiful thought about the garden in morning light, how it skips the poem line you wanted to include but feared would seem too forward, how it masks your excitement, your nervousness, your genuine hope. It's a polite letter, perfect, really, but it says everything you're allowed to say, and not a single word of what you actually mean. You're walking through the square when a sudden gust of wind sweeps around the corner, snatching your bonnet ribbons and lifting the hem of your overskirt just enough to reveal the lace of your petticoat. Your hand jumps up instinctively to fix it, but then you remember you're in public, and in Victorian England, adjusting your clothing where others can see you is nearly as improper as exposing what lies beneath. So you freeze. You let the wind play with your hat for just a second longer, forcing your fingers to hover midair, completely undecided between modesty and restraint. In the end, you choose the latter. You lower your hand, straighten your back, and pretend the wind hasn't unsettled you at all. It's not that you're forbidden to fix yourself. Of course not. Everyone knows pins slip, cuffs twist, bodices shift. But acknowledging it, reaching down to tug a stocking, tightening a glove strap in full view, tugging at your corset lacing, or readjusting your skirts in the street, that's vulgar. A lady's appearance must always seem effortless. That's what your aunt used to say. She should look as though no part of her requires maintenance, as if your hat never slides to one side, as if your gloves never loosen, as if your corset never pinches or shifts or bites into your ribs. Even discomfort must be worn with grace. You once saw a woman scolded for adjusting the strap of her shoe while seated on a park bench. It was a small thing, quick, necessary, but someone saw her bare fingers touch the leather at her ankle. They said it was the most indecent moment they'd witnessed in years. She didn't even look up afterward. She just folded her hands in her lap and pretended her shoes still fit perfectly. So, you do what you've been taught. You let the lace flap a little in the breeze. You hold your chin a bit higher, pretending your bonnet isn't slipping backward at all. You walk slowly and deliberately, fighting the urge to tug, straighten, tuck, or pull. And once you're around the corner, finally out of sight, you duck behind a brick archway. You fix everything in under 10 seconds. Fingers fly over buttons and ties. You shake out your skirts, adjust your collar, smooth the rebellious bit of hair near your temple. Then you step back into view as if nothing ever needed fixing at all. Because that is the secret. A Victorian lady must look composed, even if everything is falling apart beneath all the fabric. You've heard horror stories from the opera. The woman whose corset bond snapped mid-performance and slipped sideways under her dress, she spent the next 2 hours completely motionless, afraid that if she shifted even slightly, the entire gown would collapse like a tent with its pole yanked. She smiled through it all, and no one ever knew because no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how messy, no matter how human you feel underneath the layers, you're expected to maintain the illusion of perfection, always. Back at home, your maid helps you undress. She unhooks the dozens of fasteners down your back, lifts layer after layer of petticoats, peels the bodice off your shoulders, and with every layer removed, your posture softens just a little bit more. Your arms are no longer stiff at your sides. Your shoulders are no longer held like delicate glass. You exhale finally. Your stays were crooked. Your maid murmurs as she unlaces them, "Must have shifted at midday." You nod because you knew. You felt the twist just under your ribs after tea when the corset began to bite. But what could you do? Not in the street, not in the shop, not even in the powder room at Lady Hobson's. There are genuinely no private places for adjustment in a woman's world, only invisible sufferings in public silence. Even mirrors can't always be trusted. You've learned to rely more on instinct than reflection. The feel of a waistband slipping, the ache of a crooked garter, the quiet panic of a bonnet strap that's pulled too tight but can't be touched until you're completely alone. Because to adjust yourself is to admit that you have a body. And admitting that you have a body means acknowledging that it moves, shifts, sweats, itches, bulges, cramps, fails to be perfect. And Victorian etiquette is built on the exact promise that a lady, if trained correctly, will appear untouched by these earthly flaws. You think often of that woman at the theater, the one whose glove came unbuttoned at the wrist. She spent 20 minutes holding her hand rigid, wrist turned just so that the dangling flap of leather didn't betray her. She never fixed it, never reached for it, just endured. Some called it grace, others called it martyrdom, and you understand both perfectly. There's a strange dignity in the discipline, a twisted kind of pride in knowing how to hold everything in place while inside your stocking is slipping down your calf and your corset is digging into your side like a jealous twin. But you also wonder what would actually happen if you simply adjusted something in plain view. Nothing obscene, just a gentle tug, a pinch at the shoulder seam, a quick pat at your hip where the bustles began to sag. Would the world really end, or would it gasp first? Would it tilt its head and say, "How indecent," then go home and wonder what else a woman like you dares to do? Because deep down, everyone knows what these rules are really for. To make sure you don't look like you exist. To keep you quiet, still, composed. To ensure you move through life like a painting on a wall, admired, preserved, but never permitted to stretch or yawn or shift your own weight. So tonight before bed, you stand by the window. You scratch your shoulder. You roll your stocking down and then up again just because you can. And it feels electric, not because anyone's watching, but because, for once, you are noticing yourself. The morning is unusually bright. The street is quiet. The air is just cool enough to tug at the edges of your shawl. You've wrapped your bonnet ties in a perfect bow. Your gloves are buttoned at the wrist. Everything about you is tidy, presentable, modest. And yet, as you step outside your front gate without an escort, you feel it immediately, the shift in the air. It doesn't matter that your destination is only 4 blocks away. It doesn't matter that it's a respectable hour. It doesn't matter that you walk with grace, that your shoes are polished, that you're not headed anywhere scandalous, just the dressmakers to pick up a hem and a sleeve. All that matters is this. You are a woman. You are in public, and you are alone. In Victorian society, that combination raises immediate questions. Walking alone without your mother, your maid, your brother, or a married friend is not just inconvenient. It's suspicious. You pass a constable and drop your gaze, not because you're guilty of anything, but because he's already watching you longer than is remotely polite. His eyes trail you like a thread unwinding. 2 women with parasols come your way from across the street. One whispers something to the other. You catch the flicker of a raised eyebrow, then a soft laugh. your steps slow, not from fear exactly, but from calculation. Every street corner becomes a stage. Every passerby becomes a potential witness or judge, because society has long agreed that a lady with nowhere to be, unaccompanied, must have questionable motives. She might be meeting a man secretly. She might be selling something unspoken. She might simply be too bold for her own good. And that last suspicion, it sticks like cold dust. Your governess once told you, a woman's virtue is not only in her behavior, but in how she is perceived. And perception in the eyes of the Victorian world is as fragile as sponge sugar. You reach the corner and pause at a row of carriages. A man tips his hat, polite maybe. You smile faintly and nod, just enough to be civil, not enough to invite anything further. But inside, a tension coils between your ribs. You shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be here alone in full view. If anything happens, anything at all, it will be your fault for being here. Even the streets are built to reinforce this logic. No benches for women to rest alone. No public houses where you may stop without drawing attention. Even shopkeepers sometimes hesitate to serve you without a chaperone present. You've heard of women refused entry or worse, mistaken for working girls simply because they arrived on foot and without escort. There was that story, wasn't there? The widow who dared walk to the apothecary by herself after sunset. A man followed her home, told his friends within the week no one respectable would call on her again. She moved away before the season ended. She only wanted to buy throat lozenges. You reach the dressmaker's shop and step inside. The doorbell chimes softly behind you. For a moment, you exhale. You made it. No one said anything. No one followed you. But still you feel it, that lingering sense that you've done something almost brave, though the action itself, simply walking, shouldn't require bravery at all. The shopgirl greets you with a smile, but there's a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "No companion today, miss?" You answer with something light. "Only me this time," you say. You try not to sound sheepish. She nods, but the moment stretches thin. Even she, who likely walks alone when running errands, marks your independence as notable. That's the contradiction, isn't it? Working women walk alone all the time. They deliver, fetch, serve, but they're not expected to guard their reputation the way you are. You are a lady, and the higher your station, the tighter the leash becomes. Because for a Victorian woman, virtue doesn't live in her mind or even in her home. It lives in her visibility, or more precisely, in her invisibility. You're not supposed to be seen wandering. You're supposed to be guided. And should anything unfortunate befall you on this walk, say a man speaks to you too familiarly, or you're seen turning down a street with no respectable business, the whispers will begin and they won't stop. This is why so many women rely on chaperones. Older ladies, governesses, even younger siblings pressed into service to serve as human shields. The chaperone isn't just there for safety. She's there to absolve you. If anyone sees you, they see two women, not one. One to do the walking, the other to serve as witness that nothing improper could possibly have occurred. You've heard of men trailing unaccompanied women, not to harm them necessarily, but to observe them, to gather just enough material for gossip. Who was she meeting? Did she linger at that doorway? Did she look at him too long? And what if you trip? Just imagine falling in the street, skirt rumpled, glove muddied, bonnet askew. A man helping you up, a conversation, a touch, and no chaperone to explain the situation. In that one moment, you become a story told by others, a rumor that walks faster than you ever could. You pay for your dress alterations and prepare to leave, but you hesitate. Going home the same way feels vulnerable. You consider taking a different street, less traveled, less visible. But then you think of the stories. A woman seen cutting through the alley near the bakery. A woman spotted behind the church gardens. A woman heard laughing with a man near the coach yard. Each one punished, not with arrest, but with absence. Invitations stop. Letters go unanswered. You become that girl without anyone saying exactly what you did. So you take the long way home through the busiest streets, past familiar windows. You walk with your spine tall, your expression neutral, your pace slow and steady. You must look as though you're not trying to be alone. And when you reach your gate and step inside, unseen by anyone, only then do you breathe freely. You walked 4 blocks alone, and no one can take that away from you. But tomorrow, you'll bring your sister just in case. You're late. Not terribly so, just enough that your stomach tightens with urgency. The dressmaker closes at noon. Your hat is already pinned, your boots laced, the package you promised to deliver tucked neatly under your arm, and still you walk, not run, not hurry, walk. Because in Victorian England, a woman never runs. Even when she's late, even when it's raining, even when her younger brother is sprinting ahead, waving her onward with both arms, she does not run, because running implies desperation. Running disrupts grace. Running jiggles things. And if there is one thing a Victorian lady must not do, it is jiggle. You remember the first time you saw someone run in public. It was a housemaid, a girl of maybe 16, dashing out the back garden to chase a laundry sheet whipped free by the wind. Her hair fell loose from its pins. Her skirts flew up at the sides. One stocking leg was visible for an entire second. Your governess turned pale. "Disgraceful," she said, though the girl hadn't even known we were watching. "She'll never find a proper place," she added with certainty. It wasn't the running that shocked her. It was what the running revealed. A woman with a body, a woman with urgency, a woman with purpose. Victorian society does not like its women purposeful. Movement is a form of expression, and running, sprinting, sweating, panting suggests far too much physicality. It suggests a woman who is not contained, who is not fragile, who might not stop when she is told. So instead, you walk quickly, but with measured steps. 1, 2, 1, 2. Heels clicking politely against the cobblestones. You feel the pressure of time nipping at your heels, but you resist because running would be worse than being late. Even your clothing conspires against it. Your boots are narrow at the toe. Your skirts are layered, heavy, and likely to trip you if you move too freely. And your corset, tight as it is, makes deep breathing nearly impossible. Try to run in a corset, and you'll find yourself out of breath in under 30 seconds. Try to sprint, and you might faint completely, which is ironic because fainting in public, so long as you do it delicately, is far more acceptable than running. You pass a group of schoolboys kicking a ball between them. One darts across your path laughing. His knees are bare, his face red with exertion. No one stops him. No one scolds him. They're boys. They're meant to move. You are not. Your movement must be decorative, not functional. You may glide. You may promenade. You may at most bustle, but never bolt. You make it to the shop just in time, barely. The door is still open, and the shopkeeper glances up as you arrive, flushed but composed. You resist the urge to bend over to catch your breath because that would be unseemly. Instead, you nod, adjust your gloves, and pretend your lungs aren't actually begging for a proper inhale. The truth is, the physical consequences of not running are minor. You'll be a few minutes late. You might miss someone by moments. The real cost is internal. The slow erosion of agency. Every time you must choose poise over urgency, decorum over momentum. And this isn't just about city streets. Even in rural spaces, even in your own garden, you don't run. Not even when you want to chase the dog. Not even when your skirt snags on a thorn bush and you're left hopping awkwardly on one foot. Not even when it rains and the first heavy drop lands right in the middle of your bonnet. You've been trained to prioritize appearance above all else. You think of the running girl stories passed among women in whispers, not the scandalous kind, just odd ones, unsettling, like the vicar's daughter who ran across the lawn barefoot after a letter blown by the wind. Some say her foot was visible, others say she laughed too loudly as she ran. Either way, the story ends the same, and after that she was different. Not bad, just different, which in this world is completely equivalent. You've also heard of a young woman who tripped while running for a train. Her hat flew off, her corset loosened, and two strangers had to help her to her feet. She never received a marriage proposal after that. It wasn't that she had done anything actually wrong, it was that she'd shown the world too much of herself in her desperation. Running reveals things. It reveals curves. It reveals urgency. It reveals that you are a person, not a painting, and that is the greatest crime of all. After picking up your hem sleeve, you walk home at a polite pace. You feel the burn in your thighs, the sweat prickling under your stays. But you smile at the passer-by who tips his hat. You lift your chin as you pass the same two women from earlier. You are pleasant, unrushed, laid back. But later, when you're alone in your room, you kick off your boots, toss aside your corset, and run. Not far, just a circle around the rug, skirts gathered in your arms, hair tumbling loose behind you. You don't run with grace or elegance. You run with the clumsy glee of someone remembering how it feels to move with genuine purpose. No one sees. No one stops you. And in that brief, breathless loop, you reclaim the one thing you weren't meant to have. Urgency, freedom, yourself. You've just heard something truly funny, not merely amusing, not politely chuckle-worthy, actually funny, the kind of thing that bubbles up unexpectedly, catches you off guard, and begs for a laugh that erupts, not trickles. But you stop yourself because in Victorian society, a proper lady's laughter must be delicate, decorative, and absolutely contained. No snorts, no gasps, no shoulder shaking, no head thrown back, no unladylike gasping for breath. You press your lips together and allow the smallest sound to escape. Something like a sigh in fancy dress, a closed mouth flutter, a gloved giggle, nothing more. Because here's the rule no one writes down, but every woman knows intrinsically, loud laughter equals loose morals. Even joy must be managed. You learn this young at your first formal tea, perhaps when you giggled too hard at your cousin's joke about a chicken and the chimney sweep, a joke so silly it deserved no dignity, but still it made you laugh. And your governess placed her hand gently on your wrist, smiled tightly, and said, "Remember, dear, a lady laughs with her eyes, not her lungs. You never forgot that. Since then, you've watched yourself carefully. You've studied how the other women do it, how they cover their mouths with lace-trimmed handkerchiefs, how they tilt their heads and murmur, "Oh, how droll!" instead of actually laughing, how even humor must be filtered through the lens of control. You've seen what happens when a woman forgets. At a garden party last year, the vicar told a terrible joke about a cow and a bishop. It wasn't funny, and that was precisely why everyone laughed a polite amount, then stopped. Except for Miss Hard Reeves. She laughed too long, too hard. She threw her head back and actually clapped her hands together. And just like that, the air changed. Someone coughed. A man muttered, "Goodness!" Her laugh rang out alone, echoing awkwardly against the trimmed hedges. She blushed. She stopped. She wasn't invited back. Because a woman's laughter, if too loud, becomes dangerous. It suggests boldness, confidence, worse, independence. A woman who laughs freely might also speak freely, move freely, even think freely, and Victorian society has no comfortable place for such a woman. It's not just about volume. It's about tone. A proper laugh should not draw attention to itself. It should not suggest that you find something too funny or that you're too familiar with the person who said it. You learn to modulate, to flatten your delight. At parties, you practice what you call the social chuckle, a soft H paired with a slight incline of the head. It says, "I heard the joke. I understood it. I approve of its existence." But it never gives away how funny you actually thought it was. You have pages of unwritten rules filed in your brain. If a gentleman makes the joke, laugh but briefly. If a woman makes the joke, smile, but only if it isn't at anyone's expense. If a servant says something funny, you didn't hear it. And if you say something funny, best pretend you didn't. Because laughing at your own joke, that's practically a declaration of vanity. You once laughed out loud at something you'd read, a satirical piece in Punch magazine. It caught you by surprise. The sound escaped you before you could trap it. Your mother sewing nearby didn't even look up. She just said, "Reel that back in, darling." And just like that, you learned again that there is such a thing as excessive joy. And it's not just your family. Etiquette books have full paragraphs devoted to the subject. One recommends that a lady's laugh should be like the fluttering of chimes in a light breeze, audible but never startling. Another insists that any woman who laughs with her mouth wide open is unfit for respectable company. You begin to notice how often men are allowed the opposite. Their laughter fills drawing rooms, bellows across garden lawns, rattles decanters. A good laugh makes them appear jovial, well-liked. For you, it would make you look vulgar. There's even a term they whisper for women like that, those who laugh too loudly, too freely, boisterous. It sounds like a sin, and so when you feel laughter begin to rise like bubbles in a sealed bottle, you become an expert in turning it into something else, a smile, a hum, a carefully timed cough. But later, when you're alone, truly alone, you remember. You recall a joke, maybe one your sister made, maybe something you saw on the street, a gesture, a line, the image of a goose waddling after a constable perhaps, and you laugh, really laugh. You clutch your sides, snort without shame, throw your head back, and let it ring through your empty room like a bell set free. It feels absurd and wonderful and slightly rebellious. You laugh until your ribs hurt, until your cheeks flush, until tears blur your vision. Then you lie back against the pillow sighing, not because you're tired, but because tomorrow you'll have to laugh quieter again. You're at another dinner, this one smaller, quieter. Just family and a few of your father's acquaintances. The conversation drifts easily from horses to shipping lanes to inevitably science. One gentleman, a balding man with spectacles and an air of someone who collects fossils in his waistcoat pocket, mentions the origin of species. You recognize the title immediately. You read it months ago by candlelight, long after the rest of the house had gone asleep. You remember the thrill of it, the daring suggestion that humans were not divine accidents, but part of something ancient, evolving, astonishingly connected. You'd had to hide the book, of course. Your mother found it once and frowned so deeply you thought her face might stay that way permanently. A troubling thing, she called it. Unladylike material. And now, as this man speaks about natural selection, adaptation, evidence, you feel a spark. You want to join. You want to say, I read it too. I found it fascinating. I have questions. I have thoughts. But you don't. Because in Victorian society, a well-bred woman must not speak with any authority on science, politics, philosophy, or theology. In Darwin especially, that's the dangerous intersection of all four. You're allowed to dabble in poetry, of course, in watercolors, in music that does not stir the soul too violently. But biology, evolution, monkeys, human ancestry, that's not conversation. It's corruption. You sip your wine and listen. The men around the table debate politely. Some scoff. Others nod thoughtfully. One quotes Genesis. Another raises an eyebrow and mutters something about ape-like features in Parliament. The joke lands awkwardly, but they laugh anyway. Meanwhile, you sit perfectly still, your hands folded in your lap, your thoughts racing because you remember the passage about the Galapagos finches, how their beaks had changed depending on the island, how that alone suggested time as a sculptor, not a divine spark. You remember being genuinely stunned, not because it was scandalous, but because it was logical, beautiful even. But here at this table, to say so would be to risk everything. Your father's respect, your place in the room, perhaps even your standing as marriageable. Because a woman with opinions on science, especially one that challenges religious norms, is troubling. She's not charming. She's not agreeable. She becomes the kind of woman who corrects men, the kind who reads too much, the kind who ends up unmarried and writing letters to editors under a pseudonym. You could join the conversation, but you won't, because in this world, curiosity must be quiet, especially when it is yours. The man across from you continues, animated now, waving his fork like a conductor. He references geological strata, fossils of extinct beasts, and how the church is struggling to contain the implications. Someone chuckles. Another mutters, yes, well, if we're all descended from apes, that explains my cousin. The table laughs politely. You smile because that's your role, but it's a hollow smile. You're not thinking about cousins or monkeys. You're thinking about the way Darwin described nature, not static but shifting, not fixed but unfolding across centuries. And you wonder, not for the first time, what if everything expected of you is not fixed either? But you don't say it aloud because cleverness in a woman is suspicious, and cleverness paired with controversial knowledge is dangerous. You've heard of women who cross that line. Miss D.V.O., a friend of your mother's, once offered her opinion on heliocentrism at a dinner party in Bath. She said something about planetary orbits and the shift from divine perfection to cosmic indifference. She never married. Not because she was unpleasant. She was stunningly beautiful, but because, as someone once whispered, she has opinions that sit too close to the bone. Another woman, just a year older than you, was caught reading Darwin and writing notes in the margins. Her fiancé called it a lapse in character. He broke off the engagement. She now volunteers at the library and speaks very little. They called her curious, not as a compliment. That's the part that stings. Your mind is alive with questions about science, about truth, about your place in this careful world. But you're allowed none of it. Not if you want to be invited again. Not if you want to be safe. So you develop strategies. You hide your books behind embroidery kits. You scribble thoughts in coded journals. You read philosophy only when your maid is dusting the back rooms. And when someone brings up science, as they do tonight, you keep your face serene, nod when appropriate, and fold your real thoughts deep within the space between your ribs and your corset. But later, long after the guests have gone and the fire is dimmed, you return to your room. You pull that worn copy of The Origin of Species from beneath your pillow and read. Your lamp glows softly. The air is still. And here, alone, you're allowed to think. You trace a line with your fingertip. Endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. And you feel something stirring in you again. Not scandal, not sin, just possibility. You close the book and whisper the forbidden name into the dark. Darwin. It doesn't sound dangerous here. It sounds like freedom itself.